The dark web is a cesspool, a festering pit where humanity's darkest instincts flourish. It's where I work. I'm what's called a white hat hacker, a kind of digital vigilante paid to dismantle vile marketplaces, follow the twisted trails of predators, and shine light into the shadows where monsters hide. Most days, I sit in my dim, cluttered apartment. The glow of my monitors, the only light in the room. My fingers dance across the keyboard, cutting through layers of encrypted filth and exposing secrets no one else dares to uncover. It's not a job for the faint of heart, but I'm damn good at it. I've seen horrors that defy imagination, things no one should ever witness. Yet the case that still haunts me began like any other. It started during a routine sweep. I stumbled upon a marketplace buried deep in the web's underbelly. It sold human lives, men, women, children, each presented with chilling precision, glossy photos, cold descriptions, and price tags. I'd seen sites like this before, but this one was different. It was polished, professional, and eerily quiet, like a fortress daring someone to breach it. Unraveling its layers of security was painstaking work, like peeling back the skin of an onion, slow and frustrating. Whoever built it was no amateur. Their grotesque craftsmanship was almost admirable. Almost. But no system is impenetrable. By the third day, I broke through. The database was enormous. Names, ages, photos, and meticulous profiles of the victims spilled out onto my screen. Each entry was a silent scream, buried in the ones and zeros of this digital nightmare. As always, I logged everything, building a detailed dossier for the authorities. But then I found her. She was just a girl, no older than 12. Her photo showed a child with wide, terrified eyes and a forced smile. Something about her profile stopped me cold. An odd note in the metadata caught my eye. A breadcrumb someone had left behind. A payment log. It didn't lead to a buyer, though. It led back to her family. I dug deeper, running her name through every database I could access, cross-referencing missing persons reports, social media posts, and obscure news articles. The trail was faint, but undeniable. She had vanished months ago from a small village in the Philippines. Her disappearance barely made the local news, and her parents never reported her missing. That alone was suspicious, but what I found next made my blood run cold. Her family's lives had transformed. Their Facebook profiles painted a grotesque picture. Photos of a newly built house, expensive clothes, lavish parties, smiles stretched across their faces, captions celebrating their newfound blessings. Where does a poor family suddenly get that kind of money? The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. They sold her, their own flesh and blood. They handed her over to monsters for a taste of luxury. I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just the marketplace. It was the betrayal, the cold calculation that turned a child into currency. She wasn't just a name in a database anymore. She was a little girl, discarded like trash by the very people who were supposed to protect her. Her terrified eyes haunted me every time I blinked. I delved deeper into her family's life, sifting through bank records, private messages, and transactions. Every detail confirmed their complicity. The deposit that coincided with her disappearance, the slow splurge on luxuries, the self-congratulatory posts. They were thriving off her suffering. Anger burned inside me. My work had always been about dismantling systems, not judging individuals. But this was personal. I spent weeks building a meticulous case. The authorities would have everything they needed to pursue justice. That's how it always worked. I'd expose the darkness and step back. But this time, I couldn't walk away. One night, I made a decision. I crafted an anonymous, untraceable email and attached blurred images of their daughter from the marketplace. just enough to be unmistakable, but without compromising her dignity. I sent it to her parents with no words, just the images. I wanted them to see her, to remember what they had done, to feel the weight of their betrayal. I'll never know if they opened it, but I imagined guilt gnawing at them like a festering wound, an unrelenting reminder of their monstrous choice. The marketplace was dismantled within days, wiped clean from the dark web. The authorities had all the evidence they needed to track the network. My work was done, but her face stayed with me. A ghost I couldn't exorcise. I like to think she's alive somewhere, that my efforts gave her a chance at freedom. But deep down, I know better. The dark web doesn't let go of its victims so easily. Still, I keep going. One monster at a time, I tear them down. Because if I don't, who will? In early 2013, I was working at a large market research company in New York City. Life was good. After 6 years there, I was happy with my job. My prospects were bright, and I had a stable routine. But then, one seemingly normal Wednesday morning, everything started to fall apart. I woke up at 6:15, completed my usual morning routine, and headed down to the parking lot of my building. My car was parked alongside maybe a dozen others. As I approached it, I noticed a young man leaning against the wall near the hood of my car. He was wearing a ball cap and hoodie, his posture casual, but his gaze locked on me. Trying to keep my cool, I made eye contact. As I got closer, I cautiously asked, "Can I help you?" He didn't flinch or hesitate. With a grin stretching across his face, he said, "Can't nobody help you, homie." His words caught me off guard. Assuming he was just some wannabe tough guy trying to intimidate me, I chose not to engage further. I got into my car and drove off, but his grin lingered in my mind. The commute to work didn't improve my mood, drivers cutting me off and flipping me off left and right. By the time I endured one of my boss's infamous midweek meetings, I had almost forgotten about the hoodie guy. It wasn't until late that afternoon that the encounter crept back into my thoughts. I figured he might have been scoping out cars to steal, and someone in my building was about to have a rough day. Little did I know, I was the target. When I pulled into my parking lot that evening, everything seemed normal. No broken glass, no signs of trouble. But as I approached my apartment door, I noticed a putrid stench. Turning the corner, I was met with a horrifying sight. Someone had smeared diarrhea all over my door. It wasn't just any mess. It looked as though it had been sprayed with force. The smell hit me like a punch to the gut, and I gagged as I stepped back in disbelief. I immediately called an emergency cleaning service and my building's management to request the security camera footage. One of the reasons I'd chosen this building was the extensive camera coverage, so I assumed catching the culprit would be straightforward. By 9:30 that night, after tipping the cleaners generously, I sat down with the footage. It didn't take long to find the perpetrator. In the early afternoon, a hooded figure wearing a fluorescent vest approached the building with a package. At first, I thought it was a delivery worker, but instead of delivering the package, he placed it in front of my door, dropped his pants, and defiled my entryway. The footage showed him pulling up his pants without a second thought, walking away as if nothing happened. Strangely, he didn't match the hoodie guy from that morning. This man was taller, broader, and wore a mask. I called the police, but their response was disheartening. They dismissed it as a prank and even suggested I consider if a friend might have been behind it. Frustrated, I explained that none of my friends would pull such a disgusting stunt. The next morning, my day took another hit. I walked to the parking lot to find my car vandalized, windows smashed, tires slashed, and the body scratched to hell. It was clear someone was escalating. After calling the cops again and arranging for my car to be towed, I realized staying in my apartment was no longer safe. I booked a room at a nearby hotel and called my dad for advice. He agreed it was concerning. Whoever was targeting me knew exactly where I lived. But the terror didn't stop there. A few nights later, I returned to my apartment to grab some belongings. As I turned the corner, I saw my door hanging off its hinges. A neighbor stood nearby, pale and shaken. When I stepped inside, my heart sank. The place was a disaster zone. Glass shattered, furniture destroyed, and even my fish tank smashed, killing my fish. That hit me harder than anything else. I could handle my stuff being ruined, but harming innocent creatures, it was soul-crushing. The building's cameras revealed more masked figures breaking in, this time dressed in black and moving like professionals. Whoever these people were, they meant business. I realized I could never return to that apartment and began searching for a new place. But even moving wouldn't solve my problems. One evening, while walking from the metro, I heard someone call my name. Thinking it might be a coworker or friend, I turned around, only to be sucker punched by a stranger who screamed, "You suck, dude," before running off. At that moment, I realized they weren't just targeting my home. They were following me everywhere. The police finally started taking my case seriously after the assault, but by then, the damage was done. I lived in constant fear, knowing my attackers could find me anywhere. Then a few nights later, my phone rang, a private number. Hesitant, I answered. The caller introduced himself as Odin. He explained he'd found my personal information on a website called Docspin, a dark web forum where people shared private details to ruin lives. My name, address, employment history, and even fake accusations of crimes were listed. Everything clicked. The confrontations, the harassment, the vandalism. Someone had targeted me online, and strangers were acting on that misinformation. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the police, moved to a new city, and cut all ties with my old life. The experience left me scarred and paranoid, always looking over my shoulder. To this day, I don't know who started it or why. But what I do know is this: one random confrontation spiraled into a nightmare I'll never forget. I'd always been curious about the so-called dark web. I'd heard countless stories about its deeper, darker corners, places no one should go, filled with things no one should see. It sounded horrifying, but that only piqued my curiosity. I could never have been prepared for what I found when I stumbled across the Cannibal Cafe. It started innocently enough. Late-night boredom, a rabbit hole of clicks, and then suddenly, there it was. The site was crude, its design basic and outdated, but its purpose was clear. It was a gathering place for people whose tastes went far beyond the acceptable. The site claimed to be fictional, but the posts felt too real, too detailed. At first, I thought it was just another forum for twisted fantasies. Then I saw the classifieds. People weren't just talking about cannibalism. They were either offering themselves up or asking for someone else to become meat. The language was careful, vague enough to avoid outright confession, but the user's intentions were unmistakable. This wasn't just some sick roleplay forum. It was real. I should have clicked away, closed my laptop, and gone to bed. Instead, I stayed. Part of me thought it was some elaborate joke, a twisted form of entertainment. I told myself I was just observing, a tourist passing through. Then I found it, a journal entry written by someone who claimed to have actually cannibalized another person. The author didn't use a real name. None of them did. But the way he described everything made it sound like the God's honest truth. He wrote about meeting a man online, someone tired of living. They agreed to meet. The author would end him, butcher him, and eat him. The man actually wanted it. I felt sick reading it, but I couldn't stop. He described the meeting as if it were almost normal, like two friends getting together. They even had dinner first, an actual meal, as if to ease into what was coming. Then the author led the man to a room he'd prepared. He claimed to have covered everything in plastic, set up tools, knives, and hooks. It sounded clean, clinical even, and it horrified me. The man, the volunteer, was told to strip and lie on the table. He was calm. He even brought a letter, a sort of contract, explaining his consent. The author asked one last time if he was sure. The man smiled and nodded. Then it began. The description of what followed made my stomach churn. He wrote about the knife, the blood, the way the body reacted. He wrote about the sounds, the smell. He was careful and precise, taking his time. He claimed it was important to honor the volunteers' wishes, to make it meaningful. There was no anger, no rage, just a kind of reverence. He described the meat, its look, its texture. He wrote about cooking it, seasoning it, and finally eating it. I should have stopped reading, but I couldn't. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, horrifying but impossible to look away. The way he wrote made it feel real, more real than anything I'd ever read. It wasn't just the details, it was the emotion. He wasn't bragging or trying to shock anyone. He was confessing, unburdening himself. There was a sadness in his words, a weight to them, as if what he'd done had changed him in ways he didn't fully understand. When I finally closed my laptop, it was early morning. The sun was creeping through the blinds. I felt nauseous, hollow, like something irreversible had happened. I tried telling myself it wasn't real, that it was just a story, but I couldn't forget the way it was written, the details, the emotion. It stayed with me, gnawing at my thoughts as I showered, toweled off, and eventually fell into a restless sleep. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to distract myself, but nothing worked. The story replayed in my head over and over again. I started dreaming about it. Nightmares where I was the volunteer, lying on the table, waiting for the knife. I'd wake up sweating, my heart racing, my mouth parched. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the site, but the pull was too strong. I needed to know more, to understand. So I returned. The journal entry was still there, along with others. More stories, more confessions. Some were less detailed, others more so. Some sounded fake, exaggerated, but others had that same chilling ring of truth. I started reading them all, one by one, each more horrifying than the last. I couldn't eat meat for weeks. I couldn't even look at it without imagining the descriptions from the stories. Yet I couldn't bloody stay away. I became obsessed, spending hours on the site, diving deeper into its archives. I noticed patterns, connections between posts. Some users seemed to know each other, referencing past events or sharing tips. It was a full-blown cannibalistic community, hidden just below the surface of the regular internet. One night, I found a new post from the same user who'd written the first journal entry. He was back, sharing another story. This time, it was different. He wrote about the aftermath, about how he couldn't stop thinking about it. He craved that feeling of godlike power. He tried to live a normal life, but it was impossible. The taste of the meat, the act itself, it had changed him. He wrote about finding another volunteer, someone else who was tired of living. But this time, it felt darker, more desperate. The reverence was gone, replaced by depravity. He wasn't honoring anyone's wishes anymore. He was feeding an addiction. The guilt and shame were palpable in his words, but so was the satisfaction. He described the way it filled the void inside him, the peace it brought, if only for a moment. During those days, I stopped leaving my apartment. I avoided friends, family, anyone who might notice the change in me. My world shrank to the glow of my laptop screen and the endless stream of stories and posts. The dreams got worse. They weren't nightmares anymore. They were vivid, detailed, and I wasn't the volunteer anymore. I was the one holding the knife. It took a long talk with a close friend to snap me out of it. I realized my obsession with the Cannibal Cafe was a symptom of something deeper, lingering depression after the death of my father. It might sound random, but I wasn't fully in touch with my emotions about his passing. Reading about that clinical process of death and dismemberment forced me to confront them in ways I didn't understand at the time. After talking to my friend, I stopped visiting the site. For a long time, it was out of my mind. Then I heard about the site's owner getting arrested in Germany for actually killing and eating someone, just like the posts described. His name was Armin Meiwes. Hearing about his arrest shattered any lingering delusions. The world really is darker than we're led to believe.